Okay, following on from last video, then what I've done is populated the first section. As I said in the last video, the task that I'm going to be doing, I've deliberately chosen one that's fairly sort of low hazard, so that people that are maybe worried that they won't be able to identify hazards because they've got a low hazard, or they perceive themselves to have a low hazard job, this should hopefully help you, cause you not to worry too much about being able to identify 4 hazards that are required for this exercise. So the task being assessed is inputting data at a computer workstation. You can either work horizontally row by row, so you've got 4 hazards, so 4 rows, but what I'm going to do is just populate the first column. So I'm going to identify 4 hazards. I think that's an easier way of doing things, because if you get the hazard right, the rest of the row should take care of itself. So I think a good first step is to identify your 4 hazards first, and then from that point on, once you're happy you've got your 4 hazards, then take it row by row. So for the first one, so it's a computer workstation, the DSE regulations are going to be highly relevant. There's in fact, in the approved code of practice to the DSE regulations, there's some guidance in there and templates and a checklist that you can follow for a sort of like a risk assessment in and of itself of a computer workstation. Types of harm that can occur are musculoskeletal disorders, visual eye strain, mental stress, fatigue, that kind of thing. But this is the harm. This is important to bring some attention to, is that people tend to sometimes confuse the harm with the hazard, and the hazard with the harm, and they've got the definitions incorrect. So the hazard is what causes the harm, or what has the potential to cause that harm. So if we're going to end up suffering from eye strain, for example, or musculoskeletal disorders, it's all going to be traced back to, in most cases, a problem with the way that the workstation is set up. So we could say that a hazard is an improperly set up DSE workstation. So what I like to do sometimes is, just to make sure that I've correctly identified a hazard, is follow whatever I think is the hazard with the words "has the potential to cause harm," and then if the sentence makes sense, you can be pretty sure you've correctly identified a hazard. So in this case, an improperly set up DSE workstation has the potential to cause harm. That does make sense. So now I know that I've got that hazard sorted, I'm going to move on to the next one. Now, I'm not going to base all of these hazards on the DSE regs. The risk assessment will be too narrowly focused. In the real world, of course, it doesn't matter, but this is for assessment purposes. So what I want to do is kind of branch out away from the DSE aspect of things and focus on fire, because that is a hazard, a significant one, that even people that are working in offices and they think, well, it's a low hazard job, everybody needs to address the risk of fire in the workplace. Not many people choose this one though as a hazard. So outbreak of fire in or around the building has the potential to cause harm. That makes sense. So I'm going to go on to the next hazard. So the next one I want to touch upon is the sort of psychological aspect of health and safety, stress particularly. But what can cause stress is what I want to focus on as being the hazard. I'm going to put excessive workload. Excessive workload has the potential to cause harm, and then that allows me to talk about stress when it comes to how might people be harmed. So happy with that one. And then the final one to cover things like slips, trips and falls. Again, this is one of those hazards that virtually everybody in all workplaces is going to be coming into contact with, is slips, trips and falls. So it's a bit of an easy one, sort of low hanging fruit really. So what can cause slips, trips and falls? I'm going to sum it up as a hazard of poor housekeeping. Poor housekeeping has the potential to cause harm. Yes, it does. And then that allows me, similar to all the other hazards that I've chosen, to flesh things out in the remaining spaces on that row. So now I've got my 4 hazards sorted. I'm in a good position to be fairly confident that these rows, who might be harmed, how might people be harmed, and risk control measures, all the rest of it, that will now sort of take care of itself. I shouldn't come up against any particular problems with the rest of it now that I've got my hazards sorted. And I'll cover one of these hazards in the next video. I'll populate either part of or an entire row depending on how long it takes.